We're now 7 weeks into 2026, and as your trusted source of updates on all things Greater Brisbane, the Brisbane Channel has plenty of things you really should know to keep across this changing region. This video is sponsored by YB Painting Services, and I'll tell you how you can claim your exclusive 10% discount later. I also have 10 Admit 2 tickets to give away for an Aussie film that hits cinemas this week at the end. But for now, let's get updated. There's been a whole bunch of new laws announced over the last week or so that may have a massive impact on a range of aspects of our lives as Queenslanders once they're passed. Firstly, new antisemitism laws have been introduced. They include making it an offence to use prescribed phrases like "from the river to the sea" and "globalise the intifada" when used to menace, harass or intimidate, each attracting a maximum sentence of 2 years in prison. There's already a ban on symbols including swastikas, and the new laws add other Nazi as well as Hezbollah emblems and the Islamic State and Hamas flags, with the maximum penalty being increased fourfold to 2 years in prison. New crimes of impeding or harassing people attending religious services have been put forward, along with willful damage to a place of worship, and threatening or assaulting a person officiating a religious ceremony has had the maximum sentence increased from 2 to 5 years. The bill is called the Fighting Antisemitism and Keeping Guns Out of the Hands of Terrorists and Criminals Amendment Bill 2026. Such a catchy name! Imagine if the same people who came up with that were responsible for writing movie titles. But back to the bill. Obviously, the other part of it is focused on gun control. The state government says the laws are designed to keep guns out of the hands of criminals and terrorists. The government says the changes are informed in part by events such as the Wiambilla shootings, where 2 police officers were fatally shot in late 2022. Plans are to strengthen the firearm prohibition order scheme and improve intelligence sharing, to invest in the latest drone surveillance technology, and to introduce mandatory mental health reporting requirements for high-risk patients. Guns will only be able to be licensed by Australian citizens, although there will be limited exceptions, and it will now be a crime to possess or distribute blueprints for 3D printed firearms. The laws will also increase penalties for stealing firearms and illegally trafficking, possessing, supplying or modifying weapons. New laws that already passed last week are youth bail monitoring laws, which will see courts able to impose a GPS device as a bail condition for any young offender aged between 10 and 17, including first-time offenders. The amendment makes electronic monitoring for young people on bail permanent statewide and will come into effect on the 30th of April. The choice of the Fitzroy River as the location for rowing events in the 2032 Olympics has continued to be a controversial one, not so much because of the crocodiles in the river or the recent flooding, and more because of the questions around the suitability of the location due to factors such as flow of the river, and the fact that it has been locked in by the state government despite not yet being signed off on by the World Rowing and International Canoe Federation, which is an IOC condition, with technical assessments still underway. But last week, Moreton Bay has put forward a potential alternative. The council have partnered with Boral with an agreement to develop a flatwater rowing precinct in Launton on a site that is currently a quarry. It would meet international Category A standard credentials. Boral played a part in delivering the Penrith Lakes development, which was used as the rowing venue for the 2000 Sydney Olympics. One advantage of this proposal that has been pointed out by Moreton Bay City Council was the ease of access, with Petrie Station right by the precinct. The station is about half an hour from the Brisbane CBD and less than 40 minutes from Brisbane Airport. Mayor Peter Flannery has said the site will be redeveloped to include additional recreation and sporting facilities, an urban koala reserve, pedestrian connections to the Moreton Bay Indoor Sports Centre, which will also be an Olympic venue, and a lakeside residential community. But Deputy Premier Jared Blay has said that the state government would not consider the proposal and that it was Rockhampton or nowhere. So if the Fitzroy River didn't get the green light from the IOC, there would be no rowing. And while we're on games-related updates, we once again find ourselves at Victoria Park. Amendments to state laws governing preparation for and running of the 2032 Olympics were rushed through Parliament this week, with the opposition given just 10 minutes to review the changes before voting. The amendments changed the legal status of land at Victoria Park. Previously, the site was state land held by Brisbane City Council under a deed of grant in trust, or DOGIT, limiting its use to park purposes. That trust has now been cancelled and replaced with freehold title vested in GICA. Opposition Olympics spokeswoman Grace has said she was not aware of any consultation around converting the land from a trust arrangement into freehold. Stadium opponents argue the change could allow excess land around the venue to be sold off to private developers in the future. Both the state opposition and Save Victoria Park have suggested this being a very real possibility, given the talk of the game's operating costs growing far beyond the original budget. Community group Save Victoria Park says the amendments remove long-standing protections on how the land can be used. The state government has rejected those claims. Deputy Premier Jared Blay has said the land remains state-owned, stressing that GICA is a government authority and that there are no plans to sell any part of Victoria Park. He described the change as an administrative step to allow the authority to plan and deliver Olympic infrastructure. But concerns remain about what future governments could do. Greens MP Michael Berkman said that while there may be no current intention to sell the land, nothing in the legislation prevents a future government from repurposing or disposing of it once it's held as freehold rather than under a trust. For now, the disagreement isn't over what the government says it plans to do, but over what the law may allow later on. If you get anything out of this update, which I spent days and days putting together, you can say thanks by simply giving the video a like. You can also show appreciation by buying me a coffee or two, or supporting the channel as a channel member, which gets you access to extra content. And don't forget that there's also a new channel, the Brisbane Channel Clips, which has short-form updates and other content. It's new, so there's not a lot there so far, but I'll be adding to that each week as well. On the housing front, Brisbane has now overtaken Sydney as the most unaffordable Australian city to buy a home, at least at the lower end of the market. A report by Found It analysed home sales over 2025 and found that just 3.2% sold for less than $500,000 in Brisbane, while that figure was 4% for Sydney. Here in Brisbane, over 37% sold for over $1 million. More broadly, as usual, the data from Cotality's February housing chart pack shows home prices and rents have increased, with Brisbane home prices in January up almost 16% on the previous year, and rents up 6.4% for the same period. But in this month's report, they've got quite an interesting page which compares the way wages and rents have risen over time. Comparing the 5 years to September 2025 with the 5 years prior to that is quite eye-opening. In the 5 years to September 2020, wage growth in Queensland slightly outpaced rent increases. Wages rose by around 10.3% over that period, while rents increased by around 8.3%. But that relationship has completely reversed since then. Over the 5 years to September 2025, Queensland wages rose by roughly 18.6%, while rents surged by around 50.4%, over 2.5 times faster than wages. Even over the most recent year to September 2025, the gap remains clear. Wages in Queensland grew by around 3.4%, while rents increased by around 6.4%, meaning rents rose at nearly double the pace of pay. Figures like that give actual numbers to why living in this part of the world has become so much more unaffordable to many. And if you think buying a fixer-upper will get you something more affordable in Brisbane, check out this place in Brookfield. The Queensland Public Trustee recently sold this property on Nyoka Street, which was deemed unsafe to even enter to inspect, for $1,281,000. But that's understandable. I mean, it has a pool. It comes fully furnished. It sits on a 1-acre block and has a double garage, but no car access due to the property being so overgrown. About 130 people showed up to the auction, despite none of them being able to enter the property due to it being deemed too unsafe even for pest inspections. And while we're talking about accommodation, let's jump to Ipswich, where this week it was announced that Hilton is coming to town. Ipswich Hotel Group and Hilton have reached an agreement to bring Hilton Garden Inn to Ipswich, with the 160-room hotel to be built on council-owned land on Ellensborough Street, next to the Nicholas Street precinct. Construction will begin late this year, with completion expected in late 2028. The announcement comes after a recent audit identified 515 short-term accommodation rooms in Ipswich, which is about 310 less than would be required during the Olympic and Paralympic Games and beyond. The new Hilton more than halves that gap. Ipswich's local tourism industry brings around 2 million visitors to the city, who contribute an estimated $460 million to the local economy each year. Hilton is a brand associated with being luxe, and if you want to bring more luxe into your home, or maybe just make it look its best, whatever the case, you really should check out the sponsor of this video, YB Painting Services. They recently won 2 first and 3 second place awards in 5 different categories of the Master Painters Australia Queensland Awards for 2025. And when you see their professionalism and the quality of their workmanship, it's no surprise. With fixed pricing and a 5-year warranty on all their work, you can be sure there'll be no unpleasant surprises. Claim your 10% discount by scanning this QR code or the link in the video description. Last week, we looked at figures on injuries to children using e-mobility devices, but it's not just children being injured. A transport coalition, including RACQ, Bicycle Queensland and Queensland Walks, is calling for tough reforms after the state government releases its inquiry report into e-mobility safety next month. They're calling for changes to enforcement, retail, education, infrastructure and hire schemes after a recent report by the Queensland Injury Surveillance Unit revealed that 2,000 people received treatment in emergency departments for e-mobility injuries in 2025 across Queensland. That figure represents a 45% increase over 2 years, but experts warn the true number could be significantly higher because not every hospital is captured in the available data. Some of the reforms the group is calling for include tougher penalties for unsafe riding, restricting sale of devices to licensed dealers, increasing lanes that separate riders from pedestrians, and dedicated parking areas so that e-scooters don't clutter footpaths. Stay tuned here on the Brisbane Channel, as I'll be following this issue closely as the inquiry report is released next month. One last statewide update before we jump to the LGA-specific updates. The free flu vaccine program has been expanded this year. For the first time, needle-free nasal spray vaccinations will be available for children aged 2 to 5. Laws will also be amended to allow vaccinations to be administered by registered nurses, midwives, pharmacists, and Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander health practitioners to more age groups in a wider range of locations. Vaccinations will become available from the 1st of March. Now to the LGA-specific updates. In Brisbane, concerns about the future of the school, tennis centre and pool on the former site of Griffith University's Mount Gravatt campus can be eased. The state government will retain ownership of the bushland and the campus has been put to market, but with the condition that the Yarranley Primary School, the tennis centre and the Olympic swimming pool remain operational. The site has been divided into 2 separate precincts, an education precinct and a sporting precinct. Urban planners have pointed out the public transport links make the site ideal for a selective high school or education academy. Expressions of interest to develop the site will close on the 11th of March and approvals will be granted in April. I'll keep you updated as the details emerge, so make sure you have all notifications turned on so you don't miss any updates here or on the other channel, the Brisbane Channel Clips. And while we're on Brisbane developments, the suburban renewal precinct plans for Upper Mount Gravatt and Chermside have been revealed. The precincts were selected based on proximity to jobs, transport, shops and services, and look to increase population density close to those amenities. While the Upper Mount Gravatt precinct is served by the busway and Metro bus routes, the Chermside precinct is slated for future Metro bus network extensions. But as we've seen in recent updates, it's unlikely that anything will happen anytime soon. Shortcomings in transport and other infrastructure in these precincts has been suggested by some stakeholders. The council opposition also pushed for an amendment to include affordable housing targets in the plans, but this was defeated 17 to 8. If you haven't watched my video on how Brisbane City Council works, which came out last week, there are 5 Labor opposition councillors, 2 Greens councillors, 1 independent councillor, and 17 LNP councillors. The precinct plans will be put to the community for feedback as the plans are refined. Moving to the Redlands, where concerns are growing around the council's ability to maintain its natural assets, with residents raising safety concerns relating to large ageing trees, and councillors pointing out the challenges of keeping up with maintenance in the face of rising costs and climate impacts. Some residents are worried about large trees near their properties, while Division 1 Councillor Wendy Boglery has said that the citywide maintenance of trees presents a significant challenge, and that with council budget discussions approaching, that is an area that should be given particular attention. Redlands City Council has also moved to address media commentary around their decisions on development of the Wynham Creek Priority Development Area at Redland Bay. Before we get to that, I want to be transparent about how the Brisbane Channel sources information on happenings in the Redlands. I always try to get information from first-hand sources, and when it's a local government issue, I base my updates on official media releases. However, when it comes to the Redlands, while their media department is aware of the Brisbane Channel, it's the only of Greater Brisbane's 5 LGAs that never send any releases out to the channel. The only official source I have is their news site Redlands Coast Today, so I often have to search other media outlets and pass on news from those secondary sources for anything not included on the official site. I do try to filter out anything that could be considered editorial in nature and try to keep it to the facts, so hopefully when they talk of media commentary, they're not including the Brisbane Channel in that. Anyway, let's get to what they've said. Their clarification points out a separation between their decision on the delivery of a multi-storey car park within the PDA, which will increase parking in the area, with their plans for the rest of the area. They've said that while they've chosen not to extend the Memorandum of Understanding between the Redland Investment Corporation and the preferred development partner for the PDA, the council still envisages that the area will remain as a mixed-use residential and retail precinct among rejuvenated parks and open spaces, along with a focus on accessibility to the ferry terminal. The article says that commentary has included speculation on motivations or implications relating to the decision, but doesn't give any details of what was said. Instead, it has said, Council assures the community that the organisation complies with the principles of local government that underpin the Local Government Act 2009 in all matters relating to integrity, transparency and accountability. If anyone has information on what has been said that led to council feeling they need to put out this clarification, I'd love to hear from you. The next update relates to both Logan and Moreton Bay LGAs and possibly others, but it's these two that have recently spoken about their plans to continue to combat a specific issue: illegal dumping. The state has launched a new $17.7 million program where councils can apply for funding to strengthen enforcement, including dedicated compliance officers and tools like surveillance equipment. Under the old equivalent program, councils could access $90,000 a year for 3 years to pay for one dumping compliance officer. They could also apply for another $25,000 for nighttime patrols in hotspot areas. The program is now called the Fighting Illegal Dumping Partnership Program. There's another one of those catchy titles. In 2025, Logan City Council issued 165 fines and 97 compliance notices for residents to clean up waste dumped illegally. In Moreton Bay, the volume of rubbish dumped illegally since 2023 adds up to 3,405,227 litres of waste, which is enough to fill over 14,000 wheelie bins. Both councils will be hoping to continue combating the illegal dumping with state government support in 2026. That's it for the updates, so let me tell you about the movie ticket giveaway before I get to giving my 2 cents on an issue from this week's update. The film this week is Jimpa, Olivia Colman and John Lithgow, who shines in a role like no other. Heartfelt, funny and full of truth, Jimpa is a tender story about family, identity and the love that holds it all together. It hits Greater Brisbane cinemas on Thursday, February 19. I have 10 Admit 2 tickets to give away. To enter, make sure you're following the Brisbane Channel on Instagram, like the relevant post and tag one friend in your comment. As the film is out this week, I'll draw the winners at 7 p.m. this coming Wednesday evening in a live stream here on the Brisbane Channel. Good luck. Now for my 2 cents, where I get to share my opinion or vent, but mainly to start a conversation about something that's come up in our area over the last week. I especially welcome different ideas and opinions in the comments. This week, it's the laws around anti-Semitism I'd like to consider. I want to be very clear from the outset. Anti-Semitism is real, it is serious, and it should never be tolerated. Jewish people deserve to feel safe, and intimidation, threats, and violence directed at them should be condemned and punished without hesitation. The bill before Parliament, the Fighting Anti-Semitism and Keeping Guns Out of the Hands of Terrorists and Criminals Amendment Bill, is explicitly framed around anti-Semitism. Its title, its explanatory material, and the way it has been discussed publicly all place a particular focus on protecting Jewish people from intimidation linked to extremist ideology. The bill proposes a targeted approach. As we've mentioned, it allows certain expressions and symbols associated with anti-Semitic extremism and terrorism to be prescribed and criminalized when they're used to menace, harass, or intimidate. It also strengthens penalties around harassment at places of worship and against religious officiants. That raises a difficult but important question. Why are we responding to anti-Semitism with a bespoke package framed around one specific form of hatred when other forms of racism and religious hatred aren't being addressed with the same kind of targeted legislative response? We don't have anti-Islamophobia laws that prescribe phrases linked to attacks on Muslim communities. We don't have anti-Asian racism legislation, despite the abuse many Asian Australians faced during COVID. We don't have legislation framed around protecting First Nations people from racially motivated intimidation, despite the long and well-documented harm they experience. Instead, those harms are generally addressed through broader criminal laws that apply regardless of who the target is. My concern isn't that anti-Semitism is being taken seriously. It absolutely should be. It's whether singling out one form of racism for this kind of bespoke legislative response risks creating a hierarchy where some groups are seen as requiring special protection while others are expected to rely on more general safeguards. There's also the question of precedent. Once we start naming specific groups in conflicts in criminal legislation, where does that stop? Do we continue to legislate slogan by slogan and symbol by symbol, depending on which form of hatred is most prominent at a given moment? And how might that make other victimized communities feel? Communities who are also asking to be safe, to be protected, and to be taken seriously. I wonder whether a more principled approach would be to strengthen laws against intimidation, threats, and harassment in a way that applies equally and explicitly to all people, regardless of race, religion, or ethnicity, rather than building protections group by group. That wouldn't weaken protections for Jewish people. If anything, it would reinforce a simple, consistent message that racism and religious hatred are unacceptable in any form, and that no community's safety depends on whether their suffering happens to be in the political spotlight at the time. That's my 2 cents, but what are your thoughts? While I don't believe in censoring discussions in the comments of this channel, please keep the discussion civil. Direct racist statements about any particular group will be removed. This is about discussing ideas openly, but also about being level-headed, evidence-based, and empathetic. Kind of what I hope sums up the spirit of this channel. The laws will also increase penalties for stealing fire alarms. The laws will also increase penalties for stealing firearms. That's it for this week. Here's a couple of videos you may want to check out if you haven't seen them already. And of course, thanks to all these people who have become channel members whose support really helps keep these videos coming. So definitely appreciated. See ya.